What's an NSFW history fact that we don't often hear about? Napoleon's wife had a friend who was known as government property because she had banged so many ministers of state. In the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan's wife could only eat her cucumbers chopped, so that she doesn't masturbate. The British Academy of Science redacted massive amounts of the first published observations of penguins by biologists. Penguins are the worst. So much rape. So much necrophilia. The Academy decided the public wouldn't handle it well. Julius Wagner Jauregg won the 1927 Nobel Prize for Medicine. By giving people malaria, the fever from the malaria would go so high that it could kill off an otherwise untreatable syphilis infection. Left untreated, syphilis could lead to insanity, so it was pretty bad thing. In comparison, having malaria, which we had treatments for, was a blessing. This link. In July 1184, Henry VI, King of Germany, later Holy Roman Emperor, held court at a Hoftag in the Petersburg citadel in Erfurt. On the morning of the 26th of July, the combined weight of the assembled nobles caused the wooden second-story floor of the Peterskirche to collapse, and most of them fell through into the latrine cesspit below the ground floor, where about 60 of them drowned in liquid excrement. There is a man named Eben Byers. This link who is entombed in Pittsburgh's Allegheny National Cemetery. He was a golf pro and socialite who ended up being the victim of quack medicine. He consumed so much Radithor, radium dissolved in water, that just prior to his death his jaw literally eroded off of his face. His mausoleum has him in a lead coffin because he's still radioactive. This is well known. Nicholas II and his wife Empress Alexandra Feodorovna's letters to each other are quite steamy. Something you don't hear often is that Alexandra collected merkins, aka pubic wigs. Ammonia-rich fumes from a castle's toilet system were used to delouse clothes inside special closets. William C. Minor, one of the contributing writers of the Oxford English Dictionary, chopped off his penis using the pocket knife he used to cut the bound pages of his old first edition book. After Napoleon's death, it's been alleged, and told to me by a historian at Les Invalides, that his penis was cut off and sold and exhibited through the early 20th century. It was described in 1927 as resembling a piece of leather, or a shriveled eel. Rome lost as many soldiers in one battle as the United States lost in the entirety of the Vietnam War. It was the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC against Hannibal. And this was back when the entire world population was tiny compared to what it is now. Rome lost 20% of its adult male population in a single day. Edit. Extra credits did a great series on the Punic Wars. This link. Egyptian women used crocodile poo as a contraceptive. They shoved it up their vagina to block the sperm, and because it was acidic, it killed the sperm. It worked. Romans used to execute criminals in the Colosseum by recreating myths. A woman was raped to death by a specially trained bull, Pasiphae, a man was given wings and thrown across the Colosseum, Icarus, another was made to play an instrument and then be torn apart by animals, Orpheus, and many, many more. Edit. The main source is Martial, De Spectaculis. I'm uninterested in debating his reliability when he wrote the piece to commemorate specific events that had anywhere between 50 to 87k eyewitnesses. Writers tend to fail when the entire city calls them out for making stuff up. At the beginning of World War II, in Great Britain, over 750,000 domestic animals were euthanized out of fear that rations would be spread too thin and pet abandonment would lead to masses of strays. The National Air Raid Precautions Animal Committee, NARPAC, sent pamphlets out to homes suggesting that people should send their pets to the countryside or, kindly, have them destroyed. This later became known as the British Pet Massacre. This link. It used to be thought that blowing smoke up someone's ass was a way to revive them. Some swimming pools actually had a kit, with a bellows-type device, that blow smoke up the ass of a drowning victim. Edited, to clarify tobacco smoke. The CIA gave unsuspecting civilians LSD and then observed their interactions with hookers, paid informants, while under the influence, for experimental purposes. Anton Leeuwenhoek, the father of microscopy, used his invention, the microscope, on his own sperm after one night with his wife. Sperm was unknown at the time and he thought they were little people. Didn't the author of Frankenstein lose her virginity on her mother's grave? Boston, Corbett, the guy who killed John Wilkes Booth, Lincoln's assassin, was a raging lunatic who cut his own balls off with a pair of scissors after passing a couple of prostitutes on the street. He did not seek medical attention after he did that until after he had gone to a prayer meeting and had dinner. He also escaped from an insane asylum on horseback and was never seen again. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh would periodically masturbate into the Nile as a ritual of sorts to guarantee good harvests. Félix Fauré, French president from 1895 to 1899, died while getting head. Brazilian emperor built a huge personal library just so he could freely shag his mistresses without being bothered. John R. Brinkley was an American doctor who would surgically implant goat testicles into men's scrotums to cure impotence. His story gets crazier from there. The Mongols had a rule: you're not allowed to kill the leader of a country, or city-state, by piercing their skin. So they came up with ingenious ways of killing people. There were stories of a potential Khan that boiled a man alive. Other stories include pouring molten gold down a man's throat. Though not necessarily NSFW, Genghis Khan gave cities the option of surrendering, or face the option of killing every man, woman, and child in that city. He would literally genocide everyone in that city because the ruler wanted to fight back. And that's how Genghis Khan killed 10% of the world's population at that time, 20–40 million people. People think that Vlad the Impaler stuck people with spikes through the guts, but that isn't what impaling is. It's so much worse. First you get a thick log, maybe 1.5 fists thick. Then you carve the tip into a blunt bullet shape. Too sharp and the spike will go through the victim too fast. Too blunt, and the victim won't be properly impaled. You grease up the spike with lard. You insert the bullet-shaped end into the victim's anus. You push it into at least a foot or more is in the victim. Then you haul them up. If you've calculated everything right, then the victim will remain alive, twitching, and completely unable to stop what is happening to him or her. Yes, this happened to women too, for days. Ultimately, the spike will erupt from the upper chest, back, or head. Fortunately, the victim will have died before then. Greater than the Sultan's army entered into the area of the impalements, which was 17 stades long and 7 stades wide. There were large stakes there on which, as it was said, about 20,000 men, women, and children had been spitted, quite a sight for the Turks and the Sultan himself. The Sultan was seized with amazement and said that it was not possible to deprive of his country a man who had done such great deeds, who had such a diabolical understanding of how to govern his realm and its people. And he said that a man who had done such things was worth much. The rest of the Turks were dumbfounded when they saw the multitude of men on the stakes. There were infants too affixed to their mothers on the stakes, and birds had made their nests in their entrails. I would rather be stuck through the guts with a spear than suffer actual impalement. Buddhist monk from Bhutan Drukpa Kunli was known for his crazy methods of enlightening other beings, mostly women, which earned him the title, the Saint of 5,000 Women. Among other things, women would seek his blessing in the form of sexual intercourse. His intention was to show that it is possible to be enlightened, impart enlightenment, and still lead a very healthy sex life, and to demonstrate that celibacy was not necessary for being enlightened. Because of this power to awaken unenlightened beings, Kunli's penis is referred to as the thunderbolt of flaming wisdom, and he himself is known as the fertility saint. For this reason, women from all around the world visited his monastery to seek his blessing. Some of his most famous performances include urinating on sacred thankas, stripping down naked, or offering his testicles to a famous lama. He is one of very few Buddhist teachers to almost always appear in Bhutanese paintings topless. It is known that Drukpa Kunli would not bless anyone who came to seek his guidance and help unless they brought a beautiful woman and a bottle of wine. Jean-Jacques Rousseau had a major spanking fetish and would, at times, take his pants off and chase women around at parties begging them to spank him. He also intentionally got in trouble as a child so the headmistress at his school would spank him. Hawaiian kings commonly had harems of both male and female lovers. The first European to make a Hawaiian to English dictionary didn't want to scandalize his Victorian readers, so translated the term for the male lovers to something like intimate friend. This caused some degree of confusion when missionaries arrived asking to become the intimate friends of the Hawaiian nobility. When the future Edward VII balked at his mistress's account saying, "Madam, I have spent enough on you to build a battleship," she replied, "And you have spent enough in me to float one." Hitler was very anti-drugs in the 1930s. By the end he was on barbiturates, methamphetamines, coke and amphetamines. The raping of local women was commonly seen as a mean to keep invading soldiers' morale high. Local women would cover the faces with charcoal, ash and dirt to be unattractive so as to avoid the same predicament. Some even went as far as harming themselves to produce unappealing scars on their faces and bodies. President Lyndon B. Johnson was obsessed with his penis and used it to control those around him. He gave it the nickname, Jumbo. He'd threaten senators by saying he was gonna sleep with their wives, and if he went to the bathroom in the middle of a conversation, he expected the other person to follow him into the bathroom to continue the conversation and would get upset if they tried to just wait outside. Sometimes he would swing around while standing at a urinal and talking to someone, leaving his genitals exposed. He also drove himself around on his ranch and stopped to pee on the side of the road, so the Secret Service agents had to cover him, and there was a gust of wind that blew the pee onto one of the agent's legs, and Johnson said that it was his prerogative to pee on the agent's leg. Journalists once asked him, why continue the war in Vietnam? And he sent all the women out of the room, took his penis out, flopped it on the table and said, "This is why." The guy who invented cornflakes, John Kellogg, hated masturbation, so he recommended a bland diet which included his cereal to prevent kids from touching themselves inappropriately, also putting acid on the clit or sewing the foreskin closed. Edit. It was actually John's brother William who invented cornflakes by accident, but John still recommended cornflakes to people in their diet as well as other things to prevent masturbation. Edit 2. He also was a huge advocate for circumcision, which led it to becoming more popular because he also thought it would prevent boys from masturbating. The artificial sweetener aspartame was discovered when a researcher thought it smelled sweet and had a taste in his laboratory. The first rule of chemistry is apparently never to taste anything. So definitely NSFW. Thomas Jefferson had syphilis and loved hookers. The dildo was invented before the wheel. Casanova had regular sex with his daughter, and said words along the lines of, "No man can love his daughter like a father can." What the actual fuck? At certain point it was normal in royal engagements in some parts of Europe for the whole family to be present in the first sexual intercourse of the arranged marriage to warrant both parts were functional, and it wasn't a wasted air in an arranged marriage. Learnt this in history class. Mozart composed a song which literally translates to, "Lick me in the arse." This link, source, this link. Vlad the Impaler had his men nail hats to the heads of Turkish envoys when they refused to take him off, as customary when greeting a leader or nobility. Pavlov, of Pavlov's dogs fame, the famed Russian scientist, actually tested the phenomenon on orphaned young children as he could starve them with little or no criticism or complaint. There's some shocking B.W. footage knocking about on the internet that looks like they have had equipment surgically inserted into their cheek. Dark. The Battle of Changping claims to be one of the most bloodiest battles of human history. One of the leaders, Bai Qi, decided to bury alive hundreds of thousands war prisoners in order to assert dominance. King Edward VII of England got fat from partying too much and couldn't have sex in certain positions he liked. Either he or his prostitutes would get tired. So he had a special chair designed and made for him so he could keep banging chicks, sometimes two at a time. Puttanesca takes its name from the Italian word for whore, puttana. Sex workers used to make it for their male clients before they'd return home to their wives to mask the smell of perfume, since it had such a pungent odor: anchovies, olives, capers. The values we have for electrical conductivity through people, flesh, bones, etc., were actually tested and researched by the Nazi Germans during the World War II. This has helped today by determining safety values and proper personal protection for electricians. Ancient Rome was covered in penises. All around Pompeii, excavators discovered phallic symbols, from intricately carved 3D cock and balls to scribbled graffiti on street corners, above bread ovens, outside houses, in bathhouses, literally dicks everywhere. When Pompeii was discovered in the 1700s, this fact was suppressed by puritanical types and the church. Italians of the area now use chili peppers as a replacement symbol, including as a necklace pendant you will see everywhere. Of course, peppers didn't exist in Europe until Columbus returned from the New World. So chili pepper now equates to cock in southern Italy, and if you walk around Pompeii, look out for all the dicks. The Sand Creek Massacre. Colorado, 1864. A volunteer military group of over 600 men from the 3rd Colorado Cavalry marched through the cold November night to attack a settlement of Cheyenne and Arapaho natives at dawn. The Braves were away, so there's barely any defense. The cavalry leader knew this. The 3rd Cavalry wind up killing over 150 natives, most of which are women and children. Of the men they killed, they cut off their penises for trophies. Why do all this? Because the 3rd Colorado Cavalry hadn't seen any combat throughout their service and were being disbanded soon. They were mocked as the bloodless 3rd. Their leader, Col. James Covington, wanted to give them glory before they disbanded. And they called the natives savages. Projection, IMO. Much of what formed initial, early internet commerce was pioneered by porn sites. Raphael Sanzio, the Italian Renaissance painter, died due to a fever after a night of excessive sex. So that pretty much confirmed too much sex can kill you. There was a ritual that is believed to have taken place towards the end of the Viking era while people were still pagan just before Christianity took over. A horse penis is chopped off wrapped in linen and onions, to preserve it, and people would recite poetry to it. Edit. Some top-notch replies to this having a right good laugh. The Paris Massacre of 1961. Under orders from the head of the Parisian police, Maurice Papon, the French National Police attacked a demonstration by 30,000 Pro-National Liberation Front, FLN, Algerians. After 37 years of denial and censorship of the press, in 1998 the French government finally acknowledged 40 deaths, while some historians estimate that between 200 and 300 Algerians died. Death was due to heavy-handed beating by the police, as well as mass drownings, as police officers threw demonstrators into the River Seine. The person known as the father of modern gynecology tested his tools and techniques on slaves. There was a birth control plant in Roman times, but it went extinct because the Romans did a certain action too much. Edit. That the action was intercourse and they used the plant so much it went extinct. Somehow Stephen Hawking cheated on his wife. In 1345, the Mongols, although not knowing about germ theory, unwittingly created germ warfare when they catapulted their own corpses across Kaffa during a long siege that wasn't going well for them. The people fled and spread the Black Plague throughout harbor to harbor this link. I'm going to spend the rest of the night looking these up to see if they're true. Lol, goodbye sleep. There used to be a parasite in ancient Egypt which caused men to bleed through their penises. Apparently, it was so common among men that ancient Egyptian thought that men had periods. The real story of Moby Dick. The Essex was sunk by a whale. Afterwards, the survivors floated around in lifeboats. They were afraid to stop on the islands because of cannibalism. They ended up cannibalizing each other, instead. This link. Apparently, it's an old Jewish tradition for the mohel, the guy that performs circumcisions, to suck out the blood caused by the procedure with his mouth, and a bunch of babies have recently been infected with herpes because of it. The practice of applying direct oral suction on the wound left behind by the removal of the foreskin, known in Hebrew as metzitzar bipeh, is not common in Judaism, but is practiced in some ultra-Orthodox Jewish communities. According to the New York Post, there have been 24 reported cases of infant herpes linked to circumcision since 2000, resulting in 2 deaths and 2 cases of brain damage. This link. In British history, a guy was executed, then by order of the king, his head was sewed back on so his family could pay respects. How Cleopatra once seduced another country's ruler by posing naked in a rolled-up carpet and having her servants unroll her as a gift in the ruler's chamber. Can't remember exact details, but something along those lines. King Edward VII and his mighty sex chair. Sex workers in the Civil War used to take buttons as payment for their services. Prior to dropping the first dry-fuel thermonuclear bomb on the Bikini Atoll in the Pacific Ocean in 1954, scientists were uncertain of what might happen. They had no way of limiting the size of the explosion or determining what the yield might be. They determined there was a 1 in 15 chance that the detonation would be so large as to create a chain reaction and evaporate the entirety of the Earth's atmosphere. They did it anyway. It ended up being 4 times as large as expected, killing hundreds of people. Many of them, fishermen, in a boat 100 miles away who died of radiation poisoning. The blast was so large it literally destroyed all the testing equipment. Scientists monitoring the blast from a concrete bunker on a nearby island had to retreat to an inner room inside the bunker with additional concrete for 15 days because the blast destroyed the outer concrete walls. I can't find the story, because I don't want to end up on a list. In the 19th century, New Orleans brothels were notorious for having underage sex workers. There's a kind of famous biography of one that said she started when she was 10 years old. Doesn't get much more NSFW than that. Sometime during Louis XVI's reign in France after he married Marie Antoinette, they were having consummation issues. Some say Louis had Ed while others say he just didn't like Marie, though none of this matters when compared to what happened when the international politics were getting a bit weird because Louis didn't have an heir, a male son, yet, which is not good. So, Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II goes over to Louis and Marie's bedroom one night and gives the two a nice sex talk. Like the talk. Here's how to do the "Do Louis please make a son with my sister." It's all pretty hush-hush at the time cause Yarno, the sovereign of the Holy Roman Empire, snuck into France to help his brother-in-law bang his sister. But I'm pretty sure later before Joe's PH dies he writes about it, lol, pretty funny when my professor brought it up in class one day. Jean-Jacques Rousseau would pull his pants down and jump out at women ass first in hopes that they would spank him. Alexander III of Russia asked a ballerina to bang his son, Nicholas II, because he thought he was such a wimp he needed experience before getting married. Edit. What makes this even funnier is because Nicholas II had an 8-pack L, groomed beard, and a full head of hair while his dad was fat, balding, and his beard was more wild. Londoners used to believe that you could resuscitate a drowned person by blowing wood smoke from a bellows up their anus. Bellows used to be stationed around the River Thames for this purpose, and it's where the phrase, "blowing smoke up my arse," originates. The Japanese occupation of China, Korea and the Philippines include the kidnapping of girls and women and house them in brothels to become comfort women, to be raped repeatedly by Japanese soldiers. The Japanese government denies this. Lawsuits and UN pressured them to concede certain aspect of this blatant sex slavery. A lot of the details go undocumented and only lives on by recorded testimonies of the very few who are unfortunate enough to have survived to their hell and lived to tell about it. An American nun in China tried to protect his students from being taken. She was so distraught she committed suicide. In the 90s, a Chinese-American author made it her mission to record as many testimonies as she could and put it in her NY Time best-selling book. But the stories were so horrifying, she committed suicide. French President Félix Faure died in his office while getting a blowjob from his mistress in 1899. If you liked the video, please consider subscribing and liking. Any feedback in the comments would be greatly appreciated so that we can make these videos even better. Thanks for watching Upvote Stories.